So on that note, I'm going to move into our introduction for our speaker. So our speaker tonight is Elder Calvin White. He was born in Flat Bay, Newfoundland, and he worked as a logger, a hunter, a trapper, and a guide, and well with heavy machinery. He was also, of course, a founder of the Federation of Newfoundland Labrador Indians, and his awards include a commemorative medal for the 125th anniversary of Canada in 1992, an Aboriginal Lifetime Achievement Award, an Long Development Group Award, Government of Newfoundland Certificate of Appreciation, the Order of Newfoundland and Labrador, a Human Rights Champion Award, and in 2016, an honorary doctorate from Memorial University of Newfoundland. And also, quite recently in 2019, he was named to the Order of Canada. We're very excited tonight that Elder White has agreed to give his talk, which of course will also note Elder White is also an author of his recent book, One Man's Journey, published by Memorial University Press. And it is that book, One Man's Journey, the Mi'kmaq Revival in Ktaqmkuk, that is, of course, the main focus and part of his talk here tonight. Tonight's online lecture will feature his discussion of his life as a Mi'kmaq activist, chief, and provide a snapshot of his beliefs and how he was mentored by many people on Indigenous history, responsibilities, his philosophy, and worldview of his community. Elder White considers this a gift from his ancestors, and his experience has allowed him to be able to contribute to the reclamation and restoration of pride in Mi'kmaq culture in Newfoundland. And as on that note, that we're going to switch to also recording, as Elder White has kindly agreed to have this lecture recorded. So that'll take place very shortly. And in a moment, our technician will turn the screen over to Elder White, who will begin to give us our lecture. I will return to sort of being on screen there when we move back to the question and answer period. So thank you again, everyone, so much for joining us tonight. We'll begin recording in just a moment. And as noted, you'll soon see Elder White on your screen. Thank you.
Are you going to give me an okay?
Oh, that's perfect, Calvin. Thank you so much.
We're good. We're good to go.
Good to go.
There was only one thing that crossed my mind for the last couple of days when I was thinking about that and being introduced as given a lecture. In my upbringing, a lecture was something that I tried to avoid, and it usually came for jumping clampers when my dad would catch me, usually from this time of the year till late April. So lecture wasn't a very attractive word to me. However, I'm gone past them days. I'm a little bit too old for jumping clampers now. Thank you very much for having me, and welcome everybody. This is certainly an honor to be given the opportunity to spend this couple of hours this evening with you. Getting right into what I thought I would do is that I would do a preamble of the subject that inspired me to write this book that I had released in conjunction with the Memorial University. For those of you who are not aware, and that might not be very many people now, history has kind of found a way of making itself known in the last 50 plus years since I've been involved. But in 1949, when Newfoundland joined Confederation, there was an omission with regard to its federal responsibility for Aboriginal people in Newfoundland, Labrador. As we found out in later years, 9124 of the British North America Act spells out that Indian people are the sole responsibility of the federal government, not of the provincial government. Unfortunately, when we joined Confederation in 1949, that was not addressed, or if it was addressed, it was completely ignored, and we were penciled out. Meaning that there was no consideration given to the Indian population of Newfoundland and Labrador. It wasn't out of ignorance of our presence, because since then we've been able to collect something like 400 years of history, and in each decade there was lots of information pertaining to the existence and the use and occupancy of Mi'kmaq people here on the island of Newfoundland. And in many cases, particularly here in the Bay St. George area, that identity was changed from Mi'kmaq to Wandering Indians, and then later changed to a more derogatory term, which was the Jacketars. It was all part of denial and shame. And the intent hasn't changed for the last 400 years with regard to the oppression and the outright attack on identity of Aboriginal people right across this country. However, in 1969, because of the Trudeau White Paper, there was a chief, I think it might have been out of Quebec, who decided to rebuttal the White Paper, and he wrote the Red Paper. This created a movement right across the country that found its way through the non-status and Métis Association, found its way in Eastern Canada to the island that had been neglected, being Newfoundland. It was only from the early 70s that we were able to educate ourselves and find out about the responsibilities of 9124 and what had not happened when we joined Confederation. However, there was quite a challenge because the damage had already been done. There was a very strong belief because of the lack of history that would have talked about our presence. There was ignorance in the educational system, and nobody learned about what really happened in Newfoundland or what was continuing to happen in Newfoundland. And the only one sentence that I'm aware of was that the Mi'kmaq were brought here by the French to kill the Biotic. Well, that was one of the very first myths that we had to challenge. And we challenged that, and we found some very astute academics in society and people who were very well and very knowledgeable and very capable of doing research. And to this day, we haven't found anybody who's been able to give us one shred of evidence to be able to substantiate any reality to that myth. It was something that never happened. It was a myth, not a reality. However, as I said earlier, there's been barrels of documentation by various different visiting people and by historians that showed a presence of Mi'kmaq people in the south and west and western portion of the island of Newfoundland, with St. George's, where I live, being one of the main and earlier settlements of the Mi'kmaq people. However, after 1973, it's when we organized a provincial association. It was first called the Native Association of Newfoundland and Labrador. We had partnered with the Naskapi, Montane, and the Inuit people in Labrador to put together a provincial organization for the purposes of finding and educating our people and educating ourselves, by the way, and forming an organization that would champion the injustice that had been brought upon our people because of the omission. After a short period of time, because of the difficulty in travel and being able to work in a cooperative manner, the Naskapi Montane decided to go on their own, and they had more of a connection with their own people in the south or north, I guess, in the Quebec area on that. And shortly before that, the Inuit people had joined the Taparisi of Canada, and they too decided to go on their own. So we found ourselves only representing the Mi'kmaq population of the island of Newfoundland. We needed to exclude the name Labrador from our organization, so a decision was made to call the organization the Federation of Newfoundland Indians. And in 1974, I think it was, we organized the Federation of Newfoundland Indians. I was given the task at the time to do research work in the communities and find Aboriginal families and introduce them to our organization and see if they had a willingness to participate and become part of the movement. I had a bit of an advantage being one of the older people in the organization at the time, although I was not yet 30 years of age. I was one of the older ones, but I did have a fair amount of knowledge with regard to where our people were, particularly here on the west coast of Newfoundland, because Flat Bay being one of the earlier communities that was part of the the St. George, Bay St. George area where our people first settled and where their summer encampments were, even while they were spread out throughout the interior as smaller family groups. I always had knowledge of the people. For instance, like one of the people I contacted in the Benoit Cove area was the late Wilson Sams, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But I knew Wilson Sam from the time I was a boy because he had a Flat Bay connection. He was born and raised in Flat Bay and spent many times out there with his grandmother who lived in that community all of her life. The same thing with the Webbs family in Corner Brook. I always had a very strong connection to them. That is also my Aboriginal connection is with the Webbs along with the Breaks and the Benoits. So I knew of those people, even if I didn't know them personally, I knew of them. So I took the task of organizing the movement and then served in various different capacities throughout my earlier years with the organization to a time when I offered myself and was successful in becoming elected as the president of the Federation of Newfoundland Indians, and then found myself in the front line. I won't go into the history of the work and all of those things because we don't have a whole lot of time, and a lot of that information is in my book, and that's what I would like to talk about this evening. I would talk about the book. Before I talk about the contents of the book, I'd like to share with you some of the difficulties of a layperson taking on the task of trying to write a book. First of all, I was motivated to do this because I realized that there wasn't a whole lot of information out there to excite or to enthuse younger people who were entering the education field. We had achieved the days of early dropouts, such as myself, quit school when I was 14-year-old in grade 7. But we were now at an era in the 70s when most of our young people were staying a little longer in school. And even now, so much greater to see our young people going on and having a great presence at the university. So the purpose of writing the book itself was to make sure that there would be a shelf life to some of the history that took place in the past 50 years with regard to the organization and the trials and tribulations of changing the narrative from there are no Indians in Newfoundland, which was a statement of the late Premier Smallwood when the negotiations of entering into Confederation was taking place. It was a task to be able to change that, and there was much opposition to it, and that would have been some of the documentation in the book. However, writing a book is much more, and many of you people may know this. You probably already have books, I'm not sure, but anyway, for me, a layperson, it was a task. And I wrote many pages and tore up many pages before I decided on what would be appropriate content. Because each time I wrote something, being young and not so young now, but having getting involved very young and having to face the kind of racism and discrimination and denial that I had to deal with, there was times that I was full of anger. And a lot of that anger was coming out in the earlier pages of my writing. And I would put it away and leave it for a month or two, and then I would take it out and I would review it, and I would realize that that was not the kind of content that I needed to put out there. It need not be my anger and my frustrations. It needed to be educational. It needed to be something that wouldn't create animosity or wouldn't have people with placards blocking the Trans-Canada Highway or approaching the Confederation buildings or attacking politicians and bureaucrats. That was never the intent, because that would not get us anywhere. So I had to be very careful and very selective of the kind of material that I would accept for print. Also, keeping that in mind, I also needed to be very truthful. I had to make sure that I wouldn't be looking for things that were supporting and feeding my ego, because it was never about me. It was about story. It was about the issue, the battles that needed to be fought, and some of them are not yet resolved. They need a continuation of young, energetic, educated people to continue that struggle. So I found myself having to deal with all of those issues while I'm trying to write something that will have, like I said earlier, will have a life shelf. I was very fortunate, and after a period of time and after much writing and much tearing up and selecting some of the material, that I had some young people I got in contact who could help guide me along once I got them to listen to what I hope to achieve. They made quite a contribution. And then I was even more fortunate when Memorial University accepted to partner, and if you wish, and to take some responsibility for the publishing and the marketing. Then I had a very valuable resource that I could go to and seek some direction with regard to the motivation that I had and the content that I wanted to put out there. But the one thing that I really wanted to make sure, apart from the caution on the other things that I mentioned earlier, I wanted to make sure that it would be a layman's perspective. I didn't want something that would be taken over by academics. And I didn't want to. I wasn't and didn't have any intent to become a publisher with a history of the rest of my life writing books. That was never my intent. It was a one-shot deal, and it was going to be, as I said earlier, it was going to be information that recorded the struggle, the battle, the obstacles, and pay tribute to the contribution that was made by the followers. I'm not sure if I achieved that. I am satisfied after reviewing what we finally decided on. I am satisfied that if I have not achieved my full goal, that I'm partly there. I do believe that the book has the ability to be able to create a window for any young people or people of any age, for that matter, who want to take on the challenge of furthering their education with regard to the Newfoundland, Canada Aboriginal situation. Then in the writing of the book, with regard to the content, what I needed to do is I needed to do a number of things. It was important for me to start at a very, very early age. Actually, I introduced myself around the age of 4-year-old. It was important for me to show how valuable having a close relationship with family is into mentoring and into the development of what and who we become. So I had a very close relationship with my grandfather, who lived with us, among us for, he was 92 years of age, I'm sorry, when he passed, and I was 14. We came together at a very crucial age in our life. I was a little boy whose dad was away most of the time in the woods because my dad was a lumberjack. And like every child, you need not only a mom, but you need a father's or a male attention in your life too, in order to mature equally. And he was an older man at the end of his journey, who was certainly very pleased and very satisfied to have the relationship of his grandson. So the timing on both ends, on my beginning, on his ending, brought us together to have a very, very valuable relationship. And that relationship continued with my father when I quit school and went to work with him at the age of 14-year-old cutting pulpwood. I wanted to show that relationship as an example to young families, so they would understand and realize that because we live now whereby there's so much division, not intentionally, but because of the world that we live in, where people spend more time now doing what we're doing tonight on FaceTime than they do in regards of spending time with their sons and daughters. And that's a reality. And it's a sad one because, iPhones and face tablets and all of these things can't replace the human touch, the human connection, and that human interaction. And I wanted to demonstrate that by using myself and the relationship that I had in my family as an example. With regard to other aspects of my early writings about myself and my involvement, I also wanted to address the culture, because what I found is that people were slipping away in their excitement and in their desire to have and gain the recognition that they rightfully so deserve, is that we were becoming feathers and dream catchers. And that was not my knowledge or my understanding or my belief of culture. Culture is a way of life. It's everything from, the way we ate eels, the way we prepared our eels, the way we lived on smelts and this time of the year, because that was the most plentiful food that was in front of us. The way we treated family, the respect we had for the way we had and showed respect for our elders in our communities, where everybody, regardless of relation or not, was an uncle and aunt, and above all, the philosophy that we were raised with. That's what culture really is. So I wanted to integrate that into the early writings, so I would give a picture of exactly what I perceive and practice or was raised in at a very early age. And then I moved on to my work experiences, and I touch on some of the discrimination and racism that I faced when I left my community, because it was all around my community, but it wasn't felt in the community. And we lived in an isolated community until 1958. There were no roads, and the only way in and out was either across the river by boat or on the train, the local train that would stop at the Flat Bay station and also at the St. Teresa station, which was on both ends of our extended community. So living in an isolated community, you don't hear and see, and you don't have much connection with the outside. But when you leave your community and you go into the outside, then you move right into it. And believe me, and even my children felt it in later years, and they too had to undergo. And anybody in our community can tell you is that Jackitar wasn't a complimentary greeting when people knew who you were and where you came from. Excuse me. So I needed to address that, but I needed to address that again, not in a confrontational manner and not in a way that it would inspire young people to become radical, because I don't have a radical bone in my body, even though you might not believe that by listening to me sometimes. But I'm not a violent person. I believe that we can catch more flies with honey than we can with vinegar, and it was very important for me to be able to address that. And then that would have brought me into the early 70s, and then I talked about the organization and the people that I met out there, the people who I knew were Indians for a long period of time. It wasn't something that they discovered all of a sudden because somebody said, do you know that there's Aboriginal in your family, and did you know that you come from a Mi'kmaq family? It wasn't that kind of an organization back in the early 70s. It was an organization that went to people, it was my responsibility to organize on the ground. And I went to people who had lived the very same type of life that I lived, regardless of where they live. Like, I'll be bold enough to suggest here tonight that those of you who are close to my age, or maybe halfway to my age, would have known, and I say this without any malice, and I'm sure that the people that I'm going to mention wouldn't be upset about it, because I'm being truthful about it. If you come from, for instance, from the city of Corner Brook, you would have heard the kind of remarks that would have been directed towards the Webb's family. And there were many of them there, many Webbs in the Corner Brook, who is my family also, having come from Flat Bay. So these are the kind of what was going on in those places. And again, just as an example, the people who resided in the area of Corner Brook known as Crow Gulch. Again, these were the people who come from mostly from the Bay St. George area with the expectations of having good job opportunities in the mill once the mill started in the Corner Brook area. But what happened was that they found themselves into the slum section and become the targeted people of the city and the surrounding area of Corner Brook. So it was important for me to find and to bring to the attention of those people, but it wasn't a recruiting process. I wasn't out trying to coax. I wasn't coaxing people or imposing myself on people. I was approaching people on the basis, this is what is happening. If you're interested and you want to find out more about it, we can provide you with information. Because we needed to be, I felt that we needed to be selective, because what we wanted is we wanted a grassroots movement that it was pure and legitimate. We couldn't afford to allow ourselves to be criticized by the naysayers, that being the federal and provincial government, politicians and bureaucrats alike. We couldn't give them any ammunition to further degrade us. They denied in 1949 that we existed, and they continued that denial right up to actually in the 80s, before there was a change in the attitude of the bureaucracies. So I needed to be very cautious, and I made that very well known to the people that I approached and the people who were organized. So that would have been again part of the responsibility of that I would have to put into the into the book, along, of course, with also providing information that would allow people to be able to go beyond my intellect and my capabilities and my knowledge. After we started the organization in the 70s, we had many people who took up the alliance with our movement and showed an academic interest. And we had people like right here in Corner Brook, we had Dr. Dennis Bartel, who was a professor at the time at university, and he became an ally with regard to directing us into areas and helping in the research. The same thing with Adrian Tanner, who probably most of you people know, and there were many others. And I regret to mention just a couple of names when there were many other scholars who took an interest in what was happening with regard to the Aboriginal movement and the cry for justice in Newfoundland. And those people were great contributors to the cause. So what I did in a section of my book, what I did is I reference some of the work of those people. And for instance, I mentioned just earlier Penciled Out. And Penciled Out is a document that had been put together by a gentleman by the name, I think, of Ed Tompkins. And it may have been done under the direction or the supervision or a request, I'm not sure, of one of the people who was never a denier in any of the previous discussions that we had with him at the time, and also a politician. But you can find that information if you once you find the references in the book, then you can find the references. One of the other references that I feel obligated to mention is the thesis of Jerry Wetzel. Jerry Wetzel was an anthropology student at Memorial University when he got involved with the Conn River people, and actually he ended up marrying a girl from Conn River, and Edwina John. And Jerry became part of the movement, and in fact he was an executive director for the organization when I was there and for a number of years, and his contribution was by no way little. And when he decided to go back to university and do law at Dalhousie, he did his thesis on the Newfoundland injustice of Aboriginal people. So that's another document that I referenced that that anybody with a desire to increase their knowledge and their education could reference and get hold of. Take another drink of water. I'm getting thirsty here. We achieved to a certain degree, and that's referenced in the book. We achieve unbelievable success with regard to gaining recognition. You know, a provincial government that was in denial in 1973 and right up until in the 80s, in 2000 had, and maybe just previous to that, had a Department of Aboriginal Affairs. So look at the change. Look at, you know, and it would never have happened had there not been a strong movement and a desire to pursue the injustices, you know, and that Department of Aboriginal Affairs for a period of time had my daughter, who's a graduate lawyer, as an assistant deputy minister. So had we made inroads? Most certainly we made inroads. We've come a long way, and we have much to celebrate. However, there's a lot of unfinished business. There's a lot of work to do. The negotiation process of I'll back up again. I missed a point. In 1987, I think it was, because we weren't getting anywhere with regard to any movement on the recognition of the membership of the Federation of Newfoundland Indians, even though it had been succeeded, that Labrador had been taken care of, and Conn River had been registered, and they had been also taken care of. The rest of the people were continuously being denied, and it didn't appear that the government was going to change their mind. The federal government I'm talking about. And there was certainly a denial by the provincial government, so there was no pressure on the federal government other than from the organization itself. So I made a decision to challenge it in the federal court. I did start a process to take the federal government to court on I think on Section 35, which was the equality clause of the patriation of the Constitution in 1982. 9124 spelled out the responsibilities that the federal government had for Aboriginal people. Well, Section 35 in the 1982 patriation reaffirmed 94, that responsibility, and talked about equality. My argument when I met with the firm that I hired to work to take on this challenge was that it was a very obvious injustice. They had dealt with Conn River, they had dealt with Labrador, but they refused to give the rest of us at least the option to either prove who we were or not to be able to prove. And if we couldn't prove who we were, then of course they would have the right to continue to ignore us. But if the proof that we had was equal or consistent with what had been accepted to deal with the rest of the province of Newfoundland, then I felt that we had a very strong legal argument with regard to addressing the injustice that had been happening. Apparently what had happened is that over a short period of time, over a long period of time, because preparing a court case is not as simple as when you get a speeding ticket and you go in and pay for it. There's a whole lot of work to do, and much more beyond our capabilities, but that's left up to the legal counsel that you hire. Anyway, eventually what had happened is that the federal government decided that they didn't want to face us into a court battle, and they decided that they were willing to negotiate a process, and that negotiation took place. Unfortunately, what happened is that somewhere along the line, they became the dominant party in the negotiations. And what ended up happening here in Newfoundland is we found ourselves with a situation that was far from justice and actually had more of an injustice than anything else. You had a process whereby families were divided, where to a degree, where twins in a family, one was accepted for registration under Indian status and the other one was denied. Yet they were twins from the same family. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that. I wouldn't want to leave you thinking out there that that was the only thing that created that process. But what happened was that we had an agreement in principle that had went before the Aboriginal population for ratification. That agreement in principle was ratified and a process was put into place. Somewhere along the line, when the federal government looked at the number of applications that were coming in, they panicked and they didn't want too many Indians. Well, the damage had been done because they didn't do their due diligence in the first place. And now anybody and everybody who wanted to fill an application would find enough criteria based on what had been accepted by the federal government to submit an application for consideration. And you can't blame anybody for that other than the people who designed the system. So what happened was that they being the federal government and the organization that represents the people, the Federation of Newfoundland Indian, the executive and the federal government put together a supplementary agreement to the agreement. Unfortunately, that supplementary agreement never ever went before the membership of the Federation of Newfoundland Indians. It was an in-house document that was prepared and ratified by the board of the Federation of Newfoundland Indians and the federal government itself. That continued not only to divide, but now it put the federal government into a position where they could do recall. So many people who had succeeded based on documentation, meeting the criteria that had been earlier suggested, found themselves now losing their status for a number of reasons. A couple being because they didn't live in a designated Aboriginal community on the island of Newfoundland, because the federal government and the Federation of Newfoundland Indians had took it on themselves to designate a number of communities. Criteria, I'm not sure what would have been used to do that. I've never ever found out. I've asked a number of times to be given a copy of the criteria that was used to designate those communities, but I haven't seen that to this point in time. But people were not rejected, but recalled because of that situation. People were recalled because they had to leave their own communities and find employments elsewhere. So for instance, and I won't use anybody else other than my own family, I have a sister who was born and raised in the community of Flat Bay, where I was raised, and found herself in Alberta, because that's where a lot of Newfoundlanders, as you all know, made their way to find employment opportunity and to better their lives. And she found herself there, and she was recalled. She lost her status because she lives in Alberta. Well, there's a challenge there somewhere, and hopefully, you know, my book hopefully will inspire some young academic just coming out of university, maybe even somebody who's prepared to study law, and they may lead the charge, because we certainly need the charge to find out why Indian population in Newfoundland have to live in their community in order to maintain their status, but that doesn't happen anywhere else in Canada. So are we living in an equal country? Are we really Canadians? Are we being awarded the responsibilities of 9124, which is sole responsibility to Aboriginal people by the federal government of Canada, or are we being treated different? We are certainly being treated different, but what is the justification for that difference? So these were the things that inspired me to take the challenge of writing a book, even though I may have been at a handicap not having the academic background to take on such a challenge. I felt it was important and something that had to be done. And these are some of the things that that inspired me to be able to do that. It was a necessity. It is a necessity, and hopefully, what it will do, it will inspire other people who have a much greater capability to take up this challenge and write maybe another book, maybe a number of books, because one of the only ways that I feel that we're going to be able to make some inroads to be able to even get to the table to address the injustice is if we have broader knowledge shared throughout the country, not only throughout the province, but throughout the country. People in Canada have to find a way, or we have to find a way to educate people in Canada about the injustice that had happened since 1949 and continue to happen here in the province of Newfoundland. We need to be able to address that. You know, every time we turn on our radio, every time you go to a public function, every time you go to any kind of an opening address, you know, and there's nothing wrong with it, it's rightfully so, we hear land recognition. And then we hear the buzzwords of truth and reconciliation. Well, I can tell you that in Newfoundland, justice haven't been served, and reconciliation is a long ways away. However, the things that we're doing tonight, which I have the opportunity to do with you, in addition, along with being able to promote the book, not for the purposes of sale, but for the purposes of importance, because I hope and I look at it as being an educational piece. It's something that will educate people, that they will become more inquisitive, and once they understand the story, they'll ask questions and they'll become more engaged, because this is what is needed. There is a continuation of an injustice happening here in the province of Newfoundland, that it's going to take probably many books and many forms, such as the one that we're having here tonight, to address that, to have the awakening. We have the awakening of the Aboriginal population. We have the to go forward with regard to the adoption of the identity by many people, and we have the willingness and the know-how to engage in cultural development, and even to promote and address the language, which has been happening. So we have those components at our fingertips. What we don't have is we don't have a population support to demand an injustice by a government that has continued to treat Newfoundland Mi'kmaq people totally different than anybody else in this country. Excuse me a second. I don't know how much longer I could go on without being repetitious, or sit down and read the book for you, and that you'll be really bored. You won't be impressed, because I'm no better a reader than I am a writer, but I do manage to get through. I manage to get by. I'm not sure how my time is going. I didn't time myself. I leave that up to the organizers to deal with me. What I would like to do, and what I propose to do, is that once we get close to our hour, which we might be getting close there now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up, or ask the moderator to open up for questions. This would put me into a position to be able to respond without being repetitious, because I think if I continue to talk just off the cuff, I don't prepare notes. I never read from a text. I make a little note, like a person's name or something like that, because if not, I'll get a mental block. But with regard to that, I don't make notes. I do it from the cuff, from my heart, from my mind, from my thinking. So I think we have 15 or 20 minutes left according to my time. And what I'll do now is I'll ask the moderator to take over, and probably we could do a question and answer period.
Hello, Calvin. Yes, we're about at 8:20 there, so we certainly, if you have more that you'd like to give as a presentation, we certainly have a bit more time, but I'm very happy if you'd like for us to switch over to questions, of course. What would you prefer?
Yeah, I think we could do some questions now. It gives me a little break because my throat is starting to hoarse up, and because I'm fighting a cold, and if I continue, I might lose my voice. But if there's a question, if there's questions or comments, it's nice to hear what people have to say, and it gives me a chance. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yes, no, that sounds wonderful. So I want to start us off, first of all, just as a comment of saying I've really appreciated it. I've picked up your book and I've been working and reading it there. I got it just there in December, so it's such a treat to hear you speak about it. And I want to turn us over. Also, I'm sorry if people see me on screen, I'm twisting. I'm also reading the chat as it happens. So what I'd like to do is to invite anybody, if you've got a question or a comment that you'd like to say to Calvin and to sort of speak, we do have the ability to do that. If you could use the raise hand function, it's that little emoji there at the bottom of your screen that looks like a little hand. If you'd like to do that, then our technician will unmute you and just allow you to go ahead, as it were. So we'll give it a second and see if anyone would like to take that option. Oh, wonderful. Rory will get us started with that. So go ahead. Rod, you're unmuted.
I just wanted to ask Elder Calvin if he would like to buy a piece of art from me. And that's all I got to ask him.
I knew you were going to be there, and I was kind of expecting that. Let's put it this way: I'll book you at an art show in Quebec for later in October, so you can sell some of your fancy art.
Thank you. I appreciate your kindness. Go ahead now. Anybody else have a question for Elder?
Yeah, Jack, I believe you had your hand up next. If you'd like to go ahead there. Oh, you're still muted. 1 second there.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
Right.
Thank you. First of all, Calvin, I want to thank you for your effort in writing the book. And being here tonight to talk about this. I think it's extremely important. I bought a copy of the book before Christmas. I have read it. It's a fabulous piece of work, and I think very valuable, as you pointed out, to allow people to know the story, not only of what happened in your organization, but also what I think is really important, listening to your stories about your values and beliefs and things about the land and your life and the way of life that was so important to the culture of the Mi'kmaq. That comes through loud and clear in the book, and I think that is an excellent starting point for people who know little or nothing about what it means to be, or what it meant to be Mi'kmaq in Newfoundland, as you were and your ancestors were for centuries, as you pointed out. I want to thank you as well for bringing up the paper of Edward Tompkins, who wrote the piece called Penciled Out. I was the member of Parliament for St. John's East in 1987 for the first time, and that paper was written at my request. I hired him as a researcher to do that because of when I became a member of Parliament, there was a number of issues that were live in terms of what was happening in Newfoundland with the Indigenous people from Conn River, from Labrador, with the Innu, questions being raised about services not being provided. And I was, I had several university degrees at this point, but I was also, frankly, as ignorant as everybody else was about what had happened in Newfoundland and why was it that these services and these things, such as so-called non-insured health services were not being provided in this province to Indigenous people, education opportunities and recognition and all of those things. So I wanted to know what happened at the time of the Confederation. So Edward Tompkins actually researched the papers and the archives to find out what negotiations had taken place, what was it all about. This must have come up, and the penciled out comes from terms that were discussed, but were later in other versions of it penciled out of the discussion, so that there was no mention, no special mention in the terms of union of Indigenous people at all, or the Indian Act or anything else. So that paper was a bit of an eye opener. It's still in use. It ended up in the archives at Memorial, and it's been used for many years. It was presented to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal people that was held hearings here in 1993, because I presented them to them, and they've been in use for many years. So I want to thank you for mentioning that, because I think it has helped to provide some knowledge to me and others who have been able to see that from time to time. But I could just speak for a moment about the importance of, and when you look at your book, and I encourage everybody to have a look at it and read it, the maps and showing the area where you provided for your families and the important parts of it, and how important it was to have access to that land and the use of it, and as you you referred to earlier tonight, but a lot of the book talks about that, and I think young people need to know, particularly, that this is so important a part of what you're trying to revive and keep in the minds of particularly Indigenous people in the province. Could you just refer to that for a moment?
Yes, thank you. If you took a ruler and if you laid it on a map of Newfoundland, and if you put one end of the map in the Bay of Islands and the other one in the Bay of Spear, and draw a line across the map, everything southwest of that line would be the Mi'kmaq territory. We know, of course, that they were here at the time that the Biotic were still here, and the Biotic would have been everything from the Aniopsquash Mountains northeast would have been their territory. So there was a belief, and oral history says that there was a recognition of each of the territories. What we're finding, and what we found over the years, is that there are references to use and occupancy of that area that I just identified, going back hundreds of years. Very little about the interior, because it wasn't until 1822 that W.E. Cormack, who was the first white man, or reported to be the first white man to ever cross the interior of Newfoundland, and he did so under the supervision of Sylvester Joe, who was an Indian guide from Conn River. So there wasn't a whole lot of activities on the interior. It was only the perimeter. It was only along the coast. And what was happening is that because our people, and they showed to be in large numbers in certain areas at certain times of the year, which was mainly the summer camps. But in the wintertime, if you could appreciate, it would be impossible for 200 people or even 100 people to move in the interior and to have enough animal population to be able to sustain that many in one particular location. So what happened is that the entire area, the entire jurisdiction of the territory would have been used up and broke into small increments by families. So a family would live in a location that would be enough animal population to be able to sustain that family, maybe a large family of 20, 25 people, maybe 15 people, whatever. And then you'd have to go a number of miles before you'd find another family, and then another family. But the entire area was being used up under that kind of a structure. And then in the summertime, of course, because food was much more plentiful on the coast, people would come to the coast. We found references of a village as large as 300 people on Sandy Point, which, by the way, became the very first European community on the west coast of Newfoundland in the Bay St. George area. And the reason why it became such an attractive area for the Europeans is because it had a deep harbor, and everything was, of course, all by ships, all by sailboats back in in the 1700s, and that was when the Europeans came over to the West Coast. Because one of the other things that we found that supports this is that until, of course, the French shore didn't apply to our area of the West Coast. The French shore was from the tip of St. Anthony going towards the White Bear, not White Bear, but going towards White Bay. That was the French shore until sometime around, probably around, I think was 1783 or 1763 or somewhere around that time, before the French shore extended. And there was hardly any activity in the area that was occupied by the Mi'kmaq people, as they were called back then, because Europeans were only interested in fish. That's all they came here for. They came here for fish, and actually they didn't even stay here most of the time. In fact, it was for a long period of time that they weren't allowed to stay here. The colony was structured on the Avalon, but not on the West Coast. The West Coast was out of sight, out of mind. There was no real attraction for the kind of industry that the Europeans were after, particularly in the Bay St. George area. So it was later years before they arrived there. When they arrived there, people started moving off their summer encampments and moving a little further away, and some of them even returned to Cape Breton, where a lot of our people had come from. But the evidence of the documents that were written by the visiting people, the visiting fishing fleets who would come to those communities and see 200 people one time, the next time was only 100 people, the next time was 300. The population would fluctuate. But the reason why the population was fluctuating was because they were only seeing the people who were coming to the coast. Because they had no interest and they had no involvement in the interior, they never did see the people that were living in the interior, in places like, which later was named King George V and Benoit's Level and the west of the Annie-Upsquash and all of those places. The Europeans had no interest, no knowledge, and no purpose to go into those areas. So they never seen the population. They never seen our people who had a lifestyle that warranted living there in the wintertime, but coming on the coast where the fish was plentiful. There were eggs, there were birds, and also there was the opportunity to be able to trade with the visiting fishing vessels.
Wonderful, thank you. Calvin, we just have a few comments I'd like to read out from the chat, as well as a couple of questions there. So Alice Collins says, thank you, a great presentation, Calvin. Sid Lancaster also says, thank you, a great presentation. And then Joan Hudson says, your effort is inspiring. Even if you don't have a formal academic background, you certainly have the intelligence, commitment, depth of knowledge, and moral high ground. You should be very proud of your achievement. I just watched the Land and Sea episode about the discovery of the Mi'kmaq Cemetery near Gambo, which of course Chief Missile Joe arrived and participated in sanctification. And we also have a couple of questions. I'll start with the first quick one and then some that are more longer. So first of all, Judy says, did you get any smelts today?
Tell her I didn't go. The weather was too bad.
That's fair. Hopefully we'll get better weather soon for the whole island. We'll be hopeful. Evan also asks us a more detailed question there. A few years ago, Evan typed, I asked you about continuing to call ourselves Linnu or Mi'kmaq with the shifts over the centuries from European cultures, intermarriage, especially with the French here in Bay St. George. Would you please speak to how we retain our Linnu identity despite these influences?
Well, yeah, what happened is that the denial, the shame and the denial became the tool of colonialism. In the Bay St. George area, which is very well recognized and lots of historical documentation supporting the presence of Mi'kmaq people there for hundreds of years, what happened is that once the European population exploded, because of the attraction of the herring fishery into the Bay St. George area, and they started moving into that area. the presence of Mi'kmaq people became a threat, like everywhere else in society, with every other Indian tribe in this country. Indian people are not wanted around where people feel threatened with regard to their access to the resource and what they can consider to be ownership once they squat in those particular areas. So what happened was is that there was a divide in the identity process. There were Indians that were called wandering Indians, and these were the families that left periodically and moved. They'd be in Bay St. George and Sandy Point maybe 1 year. The next year, nobody had seen them. They weren't around, but maybe somebody showed up. Somebody went into Codroy and they saw that family living in Codroy. Then that family disappeared from there, and 2 or 3 years after, they showed up in Conn River. And then a couple of years after that, they were gone from Conn River, and nobody seen them for 4 or 5 years. And then they'd be found somewhere at Grandy's Brook up the Burjo Islands. And those people were termed as wandering Indians. Because they were on the move. They were on the go. They weren't called nomadic. They were called wandering Indians because they were on the move. However, the people who continued to live in a much more settled community now, because they found the ability to be able to survive winter times because of the ability to trade, to be able to sell their furs and to be able to trade with the population of Sandy Point, which was a European population. They felt that there was no longer a need to become a wandering Indian, that they could occupy communities in proximity to the population. They had such a good relationship with the French people for hundreds of years that they thought that relationship could continue with other people. But other people, in their desire for ownership and for control, they needed to ghost, if you wish, the Aboriginal population. So what happened was is that they were okay with the wandering Indians, but the people that remained, bear in mind, many of those people were French-speaking Indians. And I didn't address that earlier, but I will just go back for a moment because it's important, is that in 1610, Chief Membertou of the Grand Council decided he allowed himself to be coerced into becoming a Catholic. He was christened along with 20 members of his family and encouraged the rest of these people. And in later years, they all became followers of the Catholic religion. And of course, the Catholic religion was taught by French missionaries. The French missionaries were opposed to any continuation of Mi'kmaq identity and Mi'kmaq languages. That came under attack. All of the names, all of the Aboriginal people were christened with French names because it was French control. In later years, after a generation had lost sight of that, they were led to believe that they came from France. Well, if you came from St. Pierre, Miquelon, which had also a large Aboriginal population, you came from France. Back in those days, if you come from Prince Edward's Island, you came from France. But that was never part of our educational system. So there was this denial, and there was this false information that allowed people to be able to diminish the recognition of an identity. It got even more brutal in that on the West Coast in the Bay St. George area, because they didn't want you to be Indian. They certainly didn't want you to be French, and you could never be of any other European nationality. So you ended up with the term Jacquitar. And those of you who have access to a Newfoundland dictionary, which was written, I'm not sure of the year, but you'll find what is in Newfoundland the definition of a Jacquitar, which is certainly very, very derogatory, and that was part of the denial. So I hope that answers the question of the person.
Yes, thank you, Calvin. That was very in-depth and appreciate it. I believe we have someone else with their hand up, but we have a couple more in the chat.
Matt Butt, I see Mr. Butt with his hand up for a while now.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, we'll do that and then we'll do the chant. So I believe we've got Mr. Button and then Mr. Heidi, and then I promise we won't get forgotten for your comments in the chat too. We'll get them all. All right, Mr. Button, I think you'll be unmuted there by Rory, and you should be good to go.
Good evening, Elder White. I have an invitation through this beautiful book to go to the next powwow. And I would like to know when the next powwow would be in Flat Bay.
I think it's the weekend of the 13th of July. It's always the second week in July. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I think it is the 13th, but there may be somebody else on here who has the date, and they may be able to feed that to you. I don't know if Ivan is still available, but we will get that to you.
Yeah, that's St. George's me?
Flat Bay.
No, St. George's me.
Oh, St. George's you. Okay. Oh, well. Okay. I didn't recognize you for a second. Okay. We'll get that information to you. That's not a problem, sir.
I'm living in St. John's now,
Right.
But I go back a few years in St. George's. I remember the morning when we woke up, the big and early 1940s, when the Sandy Point became an island.
1950.
A little before 1950, when it washed through first.
Yeah.
But after, you could still walk across until the 1950. You're correct. So that's my history. I have never until I read your book found another person who knew anything about bobbing eels. And a piece of fatback pork and a 4-inch nail and enough line to go to the bottom, and you'll fill your dory.
You got it.
Because I filled a dory on the just west of the government wharf in St. George's, just down from the house, with eels. Called the crowd over in Harmon Field, and they came over and they took all the squirming eels off our hands. So that's, by the way, not only were the people of St. George's on the West Coast forgotten over the years, they also didn't have much food. There's a document, I understand, in the archives in St. Pierre, signed by a lot of people of St. George, particularly in the St. George's and the Sandy Point area, wanting to become French citizens because they wouldn't, there wasn't a possibility of standing another winter without starvation. That was how tight the warships come in, and they protected the shoreline, which was the French shore of the Southwest Coast, or West Coast, shall we say.
Right.
And it was a rough time, and my father remembered it very well. My father was Norman Butt.
Right. So he probably had a barrel of Indian meal.
Yes. The forward by Kellyanne is a beautiful piece of work too.
It is.
And I have a book of my own that's going to Kelly, and you will have one next July, and when I get signatures on yours. Thank you very much for a lovely evening, and what you are doing for the Mi'kmaq Nation is absolutely long overdue. And I remember one more thing. I remember you're talking about derogatory. Steel Mountain Road, and you remember Steel Mountain Road, I would imagine.
Very well.
That was the place where it was affectionately known as Dogtown.
Yeah.
And you know who lived there.
I do. They became part of the movement the first week that we organized.
Exactly. Thank you very much for a lovely evening. And I will see you in July.
Just to add to your information, in 2019, the gap repaired itself, and now you can walk down there in sneakers anytime.
Excellent, excellent. A little too late for the Florida of Newfoundland, because Sandy Point, what a beautiful resort area that would make.
On the weekends now, in the summertime, there's anywhere from 50 to 100 quads that go down there on the weekend. People go down and cook up and visit the cemeteries and do research. Yep, great.
Marvelous, marvelous. Of course, there's one cemetery that's lost there to the water. The oldest cemetery is gone, I understand.
Yes.
But
Yes.
that is beautiful, and it should have been made that way quite a number of years ago. Thank you very much for a good evening, sir.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both for that conversation. This has just been such a wonderful night. We're all so grateful. I just want to be cognizant of time so we get, the comments in the chat there. And I believe we do have one more person with their hand up. So I think we'll go to you, Heidi, for your question, and then we'll go to the chat, and then we'll do one last call for hands. So thank you so much. I know, Calvin, we had your time for the evening. We're so grateful.
Good.
Oh my gosh. Okay, it's me. Oh my gosh, Elder White, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us this evening, and for writing your book, and for everything that you're doing. And I think that it's so important now more than ever. I'm a historian, so I understand how complicated history is, and how people don't really understand how complicated history is. And it just makes it's much more interesting to me that we can have people sharing these diverse experiences and just enrich our understanding of this place. And you made a comment earlier that a lot of people don't know about the terms of union and what happened with Confederation, and I completely agree. And even not even just across Canada, people don't know, but even here in this province, people don't know, and they don't understand that we're the only province that where Indigenous rights come under provincial jurisdiction first, and then there's all this work that has to be done to reach the federal level. And so I think I guess my question is, and it's probably hypothetical, but do you think there's going to be any point in time where anything from the terms of union could be overturned in terms of the federal government having more responsibility, first line responsibility for Indigenous rights for peoples in this province? It seems like it's much more complicated for Indigenous peoples in this province to access the rights that Indigenous peoples in the other provinces can access, the federal rights. So it's a hypothetical question. It's political, and I'm not a lawyer or a political scientist, but are we always going to be having this complicated approach to Indigenous rights in this province, where it's complicated by the province having a jurisdiction, but the federal government having all of these resources that are available to everybody else in Canada?
I would hope to think not. I'm an optimist, and I believe, and this is why I do what I do, and this is why I was inspired to write the book, because even though it was far beyond my capabilities, with the help that I had, I managed to get it done. But I won't stop preaching. I won't stop talking. I won't stop raising the issue, because I'm in hope, and I believe that at some point in time there's going to be some person out there who's going to have that same vigor that we had. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Marilyn Johns, the Tony Johns, the John Olivers, and the Calvin Whites of the movement in the 70s. These are the people I'm referring to. There's going to be somebody out there who's going to be a young academic, who's going to be able to give a greater challenge, because they'll have the background and the confidence to be able to take on the bureaucracies that are there, and they'll be able to challenge it all the way, even if it means going back to the courts and going to the highest court in the land. But it has to be done. Somebody has to do it. I'm optimistic that it will happen, because if you look at where we've come, 50 years ago, little under 50 years ago, well, we can go back to 1949. In 1949, there were no Indians in Newfoundland, Labrador, period, according to the Smallwood era. The federal government was quite contented to be able to accept that. Look what we've done. We've changed that. We do have 25,000 people who are part of the Hollywood who have status. Conn River is designated as a reserve. The Labrador people have some of their rights addressed. The Métis Association, or I think that name might have changed now, but they're an organization to be reckoned with. So we have made some unbelievable gains in society. We're no longer in denial, even if it's only lip service. They're talking about land recognition and or addressing it whenever a conference opens up or a discussion, even the one we're having tonight. It's become part of every institute now to give land recognition, and everybody is talking the buzzword about truth and reconciliation. Well, my job for as long as I can speak is going to be to speak that truth, and that truth is to talk about the injustice that's happened only in Newfoundland. There's been injustice right across this country for over 500 years when we look at the history of how the federal government has dealt with Aboriginal people. And I could give you another hour of addressing some of the national issues that I'm familiar with, that I've educated myself over the years. But there's no need to even go there. We've got enough injustices in Newfoundland here in itself to fill another hour of discussions. And kind of a long-winded answer, but that's me. But I am optimistic, and I continue to hope that at some day I'm going to see people, or even as a person, provide that leadership that is required to take on the challenge that has been put on the shelf.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Calvin. I've got a few comments there in the chat. I also just very quickly note that Jack Harris did jump in to note that the legal context is a bit complex there, and he says that federal rights and obligations do exist, but there's just been no will in that way to address them at Confederation, left to the province. And it's a question of affirmation of those rights around Section 35. And also, as Ivan White notes, that Confederation applied them, they addressed them with ignorance, which I think is a very fair comment. We do, however, have a couple more questions for you that I don't want to get lost. So one from David says, "Thank you so much, Elder White. That was a beautiful talk." He notes, "I've been finding lots and lots of thought-provoking things in the book halfway through. And I was wondering if you could say a bit about how your choice of Billy Joe's canoe as the front cover came about."
Because there's a separation, not a separation, just a separation in identity. Conn River is a reserve. It's not part of it wasn't part of the Federation of Newfoundland Indians from about 1982 onward, but it was always part of the nation. We're one people. We're the same people, and while I didn't feel comfortable to address the issues of Conn River because I don't have that right or that ability, I don't even have that knowledge for that matter. I wanted to show that unification, that we are a nation, and what better way than to use something as beautiful as that canoe, and there's history to that also. When the very first canoe was built, and the trial runs were being done with regard to making the trip by the Conn River people, by Chief Bill Joe and Missile Joe and his people, they came to Flat Bay. And a lot of the finish and repair work was done in the band council basement of Flat Bay. And the trial runs was done in the ocean in Flat Bay. So there's that connection was there. And I wanted to have that connection to show that we're talking about a nation. We're not talking about an organization that pops up here and there and everywhere.
Thank you. That's a wonderful and very thoughtful answer. I was really glad to hear that. I curious myself. And one other question from Margot Dooley. As she asks, was the area around Jeffries Robinson's part of traditional Mi'kmaq territory and even further south?
Yes, it was. All that territory, all of that land was known and recognized to be Mi'kmaq territory. Actually, there was reserve land in the Codrai Valley. There was land identified as reserve land. Not only was it part of the territory or the jurisdiction, but after the Europeans settled there, there was a portion of the land that was set aside as reserve land. And we do have map. I don't have it, but I think I just seen recently that Paul Pike posted a copy of the map, so he has it in his possession.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm seeing some wonderful celebratory emojis. So I'm just going to leave a couple quick comments there, as I know we're rapidly approaching 9 o'clock. And that Marlena says, thank you so much, Calvin. We've appreciated the book and your presentation. Chief Joanne Mills, sorry, trying to scroll there, says, thank you so much for sharing the much needed information. Evan from earlier says, my apologies for pronunciation, but well then, Calvin, I continue to learn so much from you. There's the information about the powwow at St. George's for everyone. And then we have a couple of comments there. Just one more from Sid, who says, just a comment here, and I sincerely believe the experience of the Mi'kmaq of the, my apologies, I don't know if I say that name right, that they can bring to bear the federal responsibilities to all Indigenous people, and that would be a tremendous force in shaping a better future for folks across the land, and that the Indian Act is in profound need of change or abolishing in favor of Indigenous sovereignty. David says, thank you. And last, Bobby Boland says, I'm appreciative of your time, the way you just let the history flow out of you like a river, and your passion and your humor. And of course, lots of people mentioning your book is available. So I think on that note, as we're at time, I would like to turn it over to you, Elder White, for any last remarks you'd like to share with us. And also on behalf of the Newfoundland Labrador Historical Society, to just thank you so much for your time this evening and for giving us this talk.
No, the thank you is coming from me. I'm so appreciative that you gave me this opportunity. This has been my passion. I've been doing this for 50 plus years now, and I never impose myself on people or organizations, because that's not our way of life. But I do have a story to tell. I'm a very passionate person with regard to the injustice. And when I took on this challenge in 1972 or 1971, I should say, it wasn't a project. It wasn't a 10-week project or a 5-week project. It's a lifelong thing. So as long as the Creator gives me the voice and gives me the energy, I will do what I'm doing tonight. All I need is the opportunity that you have provided me. And when that opportunity is available, I will certainly take advantage and do my best to educate and to become educated. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Calvin. And also want to note, I'm not sure if you're able to see the chat, but there are numbers of also thank yous from Paul Pike, from Kelly Butler, from I think your daughter Judy, just pouring in saying just how much they appreciated and enjoyed the talk. So again, Elder White, just thank you so much for this evening.
And I'm going to say hello to my 2 granddaughters that I see there that is sitting there. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you all for joining us for what was a very important and just wonderful experience this talk.
Bye, Chrissy and Chelsea. And everybody else.
Oh, it's been such a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.